If you take a good powerlifting program, you swap out the bench with overhead, and then you swap out the SBD day with something like an event day, where you just cycle through a bunch of different events and treat them more like practice, you pretty much have a good strongman program. Hi, my name is Cameron Ray, the owner of the Atlas Strength Shop in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and recently I was asked my opinion on how well different strength sports transfer over to the sport of strongman. But before we talk about that, what I'd like you to do is like this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out a lot. So I was asked this by a powerlifter. And the reason why is because people were saying that because he is so good at powerlifting, he ought to be able to switch over to strongman and sweep. And he was explaining that it's not really the case because a lot of the movements are significantly different. So today we're going to talk about not only strongman, but CrossFit and Olympic lifting and how well those sports transfer over to the sport of strongman. So when it comes to powerlifting, those guys have a tremendous amount of very specific raw strength, but that tends to only be in standing in one spot. In the deadlift, they're probably going to do very well, no matter what the height on the deadlift, because the deadlift is something they train religiously, squat something they train religiously, and that is going to carry over to the deadlift and strongman as well. The biggest problem I see with powerlifters whenever they switch over to a sport like strongman is that they hardly ever overhead in their programs. Because of that, a lot of them don't have the mobility to go overhead or the technique, especially with things like the circus dumbbell or the log that require a good bit of technique to be good at it. They also typically don't do too well in the moving events, things like sandbag medleys, farmer carries, yoke. Movements are where you have to go from point A to point B faster than the other guy that's moving from point A to point B. Because of this, while they do really well as a novice, they can't really just jump into open and sweep like a lot of people think they might. That being said, if you are a 700-pound deadlifter, you have no business competing in a novice division for strongman. You should compete as open and do your best, because you probably will win as a novice, but are you really a novice strength athlete if you can pull 700 pounds? As far as the programming goes, it's really simple. For most of the year, a strongman and a powerlifter's program looks very similar. If you take a good powerlifting program, you swap out the bench with overhead, and then you swap out the SBD day with something like an event day, where you just cycle through a bunch of different events and treat them more like practice, you pretty much have a good strongman program. Now, once you pick an event and you start getting closer to that event, it's going to change dramatically because you're training for a specific event. But when you're just general, the programs look almost identical. So it's, while you can't just jump straight from your powerlifting program into a strongman competition and expect to do well, you can make that transfer pretty quickly. I'd say, 12 weeks, you can probably make that transfer. So if you're in your off season as powerlifting, you want to try something different, look for a local strongman competition. And if you need help with programming, hit us up. The people who do very well with transferring from one sport into another seem to be CrossFitters. So I got my start in CrossFit and realized real quick that I really hate burpees. I discovered strongman, made the switch, never looked back. The cool thing about transferring from something like CrossFit into strongman is you already have a huge aerobic capacity, which means by that fifth event, you're not going to be as gassed as the guys you're competing against. And you already have a good frame of reference for things like a push press, a push jerk, split jerk, getting things from the ground to the overhead position, which is an advantage you're going to have against the powerlifters that signed up for that competition. Because of this, it's very easy to make that switch from CrossFit into strongman. Now, that being said, a big thing that CrossFitters lack is direct programming. They like to come in and CrossFit by design, at least in most boxes in America, it's randomized. So you're not focusing on a specific thing. So what I'll say, if you're a CrossFitter looking to do a strongman competition, you really want to take it seriously, find a strongman coach. They can program with a specific purpose in mind rather than just trying to be pretty good at everything, which is what CrossFit really does excel at. Also, use what you know to your advantage. If you're doing CrossFit, you already have a pretty good handle on things like the split jerk, use a split jerk. Most strongmen do not have a good handle on the Olympic lifts, And because of that, they tend to push press everything, and you might be able to beat these guys on something like an overhead. Now, that being said, unlike the powerlifters who are very specific in things like deadlift, because you're more of a generalist as a CrossFitter, you probably need to compete novice your first event, because these weights are going to be way heavier than anything you're used to. So unless you're somebody who competes at like the regionals level or the games level, go ahead and compete novice for your first strongman competition. Now, for Olympic weightlifters, personally, I think their training is way too sport specific to easily make that transition into strongman, but that's going to really depend on the individual athlete. I know some athletes who were members here at Atlas that primarily did Olympic lifting, and they excelled at strongman when they decided to dabble in it. They're already really explosive. They tend to be very good overhead, but the problem is they hardly ever do moving events and other conditioning, and they hardly ever do things like deadlift really heavy. Most of their deadlifts are for the purpose of getting really good at the clean or the snatch. So they tend to get left behind on a lot of the deadlift events. So that's really it. If you have any specific questions, drop them in the comments. I'd love to answer them. If you're in the Baton Rouge area, hit us up, and I'd like to meet you. Hit me up on Instagram. That's usually the best way to get in touch with us. You can come and be part of this community we've worked so hard to build. If you're not in the Baton Rouge area and you would still like to support us, the best way to do that is to head to the website, check out our programming options, check out our apparel line. I designed the apparel myself. I think it's pretty cool. We also have 2 strongman competitions coming up within the next few months. We have the 3rd annual Rougarou Classic, which is going to happen November 19th here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And we have Louisiana Strongest Man, which is going to be on April 1st. After my November comp is over, I'm going to put the April comp in Iron Podium. You can check that out. Until next time, keep that tight.